activities at Cidacs. So it ranges from like field campaigns, installing meteorological instruments, to study land atmosphere interactions. We do satellite or radar remote sensing. So like that map is for fire monitoring, so it's from satellite remote sensing. And there are other variables that you can extract from satellite, like wind, over there. And there's a lot of activity on model development, numerical model development for weather forecasts, climate projections. So there are projects on seasonal forecasts, waves, and there are different outputs of these forecasts. Ah, é verdade, não tem como, tá bem. So to have these numerical weather, to do NWP, numerical weather forecast, we need a supercomputer in order to have the output in useful time. So we have this infrastructure of a supercomputer. There are two systems. One is Cray XE, which looks bigger, but actually they are not comparable. The top one is slower, more nodes, more processors, but it's mostly for research, if I'm not in research. And the second one is for mostly operations activity. So operational weather forecast, planning, all this. And for model, to do modeling of the climate system, there are all these components. We need to have the atmosphere, upper atmosphere, all the spheres like land biosphere, land hydrosphere, rivers, ocean, and there are all these processes. They have to be connected, and our equations are based on conservation of mass, energy, water. Everything is so closed system. And there are several processes occurring in a model, like cloud, turbulence, precipitation, radiation, radiative fluxes. So everything is connected. Like this is cloud, so the cloud precipitates rain. The presence of clouds changes the radiative budget. We can have more absorption, we can have some reflection, so it changes the radiative budget. Radiation reaches the surface and affects the vegetation, the evaporation of water, and the energy, because the vegetation can absorb that energy from the solar, and then it also evaporates. So all these energy components are balanced at the surface through what we call soil biosphere atmosphere models. And then because you have this surface and roughness, you can produce some turbulence, either mechanically, either through heating the surface. So all these processes, they are linked together in the model. So whenever we output temperature or wind, pressure, humidity, everything is balanced in a system of equations. They all solve simultaneously all these variables. And then we have developed at Cidacs this resilient Earth system model. So we have this atmospheric part, there's an ocean part, they are all coupled. There's this biosphere, land, and hydrology. And to make it what we call Earth system model, we have to have also the chemistry cycle, like carbon cycle, sulfur cycle, included into the model. So then we call it an Earth system model. So there's a hierarchy of atmospheric models. It's mixed up with Portuguese, sorry. But the idea is that you have a global model that reproduces the phenomena globally. Things that are happening on the other side of the globe may have effects, influence on this side of the planet. So things are linked. So a global model will reproduce the climate or the weather state globally. Then you have we call it regional models. When you choose a region, large region, like a continental scale. So we call it regional models. But they're driven by the global models. So the regional models are driven by the global models. And there are more mesoscale or maybe local scale models, which are driven by these other regional models. It's hard to go from global directly to a very fine or local scale models. So we normally have some intermediate models to reach a very local scale or high resolution. So there are dependents, and then you use them also for different scale problems. But you have to have a global model initially. And this is the term we call it downscaling. The idea is that you have a very coarse picture or coarse resolution data, and then you want downscale, you want to reduce the scale of that information to a local scale. So for instance, in an area like we are around this valley, for instance, we have a model at 20 kilometers. In 20 kilometers, this is the topography. For those in Sao Paulo, you recognize Sao Paulo and the metropolitan area of Sao Paulo. And this is at 5 kilometer topography. You can check, you can see the difference. Like in a 5 kilometer, you can actually notice that in the central part of Sao Paulo, the capital is sort of lower than surroundings. The surroundings is higher and generally cooler, not only because it's high, but also there's some vegetation cover that distinguishes. But if you are running at 20 kilometers, you can't distinguish this lower flat area and lower in the central Sao Paulo. Also, you can't distinguish, there is a valley here that you can't see in a 20 kilometer. So if the problem is related to a valley of a river basin there, like Paraíba river basin, you can't see in a 20 kilometer. There is no this process of a valley, like raining on top of the mountains and having high temperatures in the middle of the valley and producing this precipitation that's related to valley circulation. So it depends. If your problem is not related to that, you don't need, because this is a lot more computer consuming. It requires more computer effort. So this is just an idea, like a global model would be this whole box here. You have a single information from a global model. If you're going to a 20 kilometer resolution, that's what we nested to a global model, then you can have like a 10 by 10, you add 100 points of information compared to the original single grid point. So you add a lot of information there. But you have to distinguish if you need it or not. If your problem requires that detail on it. But just to give an idea of the amount of information that's added when you go to a higher resolution. This is everyday run, operational run. Every day we have this global model called Brazilian atmospheric model. It runs twice a day at about 20 kilometer resolution, covering the whole globe at 20 kilometer resolution, runs to 10 days, 10-day forecast, and twice a day. So after 12 hours, you have an update of the global atmospheric state. And these conditions are, the global model drives regional models.
See, but you receive a lot of information, continuously, from different parts of the globe.
Yes. The initial condition, we receive it's updated continuously. It's all the time receiving observations from everywhere. So you view the initial condition, and then you trigger the model to run. Then it runs freely, the global model. So yes, we have received observations continuously when there is a telecommunication system receiving the data. And then it drives these two models. But these two, they are dependent on the global. The boundary conditions comes from the global model. So it depends on the quality of the global model, the output conditions. Okay. But this one, because it's high resolution, in general, they're running at a shorter range. The other goes to 10 days, and these are going to 5 days or 2 days. So we can have outputs like that, some data precipitation, like hourly information of precipitation. Every hour we can have information of precipitation at a certain grid box, at a certain location. Temperature, relative humidity, winds. You can have other variables. These are the most commonly requested by the users. Okay. So, you can see it's hard to see, it's very small, but this is time, like 10, there are 3 days here. There are three days here. You can see 3 peaks, and it is every hour output information. Okay. So, for instance, you can check if a disease is happening in conditions of high humidity, this is high humidity, or in very high temperature, or if it's happening in moments of precipitation, or if it's happening at moments of very weak winds. So you can try to correlate those moments with the disease. And I listed some weather conditions that may impact. I don't know, it's just like brainstorming of someone who doesn't know about health issues. Just like brainstorm, just I was thinking, oh, cold weather, so you would need if there's some disease that would be caused by cold weather, so maybe you need to have information of temperature or daily minimum temperature. Or if it's pollution, probably you would have to have like weak winds and high atmospheric instability. When the atmosphere is very stable, there is very little mixing. Things doesn't diffuse but disperse. So if you have high stability and then you have very weak winds, so things will really be stagnated. This is kind of what happens in Chile. They have this what called anticyclone. It really is like a lid on top of the city, and the things get really confined at low levels. Whatever is emitting in terms of pollution will be confined. But that's climatologically normal there. Hot weather, for instance, you can look for daily maximum temperature. You can look at some threshold, because hot weather in Salvador will be very different from hot weather in Europe. You probably look at different thresholds. Like in Rio, above 30. But for Europeans, above 25 is hot days. So it will depend. It may be some thresholds there. Heat waves, like if you can forecast or if you can check that the length of the consecutive days in which temperature will be above a certain threshold. In general, we use percentile. I think it's 95, temperature above 95 percentile, consecutive in 6 days. So that's called a heat wave. So that could be something like correlated with some, I don't know, humid weather or changes in weather. So there may be some change in temperature, very abrupt, abrupt change in pressure. You can have all these kind of information extract from the model output. There are other indexes that are used for climate change that was recommended by a group, a task force group. These are climate extreme indices. And these codes are very common from the people that use these climate indices. So for instance, CDD is consecutive dry days. If you have very long period of dry days, probably it's going to be very dry, and air probably will also become very dry, but it's dry in terms of non-precipitating. But the idea is to check if in a climate change, if the duration of these consecutive dry days, will they be longer or will they be shorter? How much we can stand to have a very long period without precipitation. For agriculture, it's very serious. I don't know, for health. Then you can, that CSDI is for like cold waves, like we have heat wave, WSD is heat wave, is an index for measuring heat wave. You can have index for measuring cold wave. And so there are several indices that we use for climate change. They're mostly constructed looking into agriculture, but I think some of them can be used also to assess some diseases, changes in disease frequency, for instance, if they can become more frequent or less frequent. So there are other indices that I think I heard about, like people discussing about albedo, but in general, if you have, it's mostly related to short wave solar radiation. If you have solar radiation, it's going to trigger some photochemical process in those chemical volatile organic compounds that produce more ozone. So what you're looking at is not really albedo, but it's solar radiation reaching the surface. So you can have ozone production. Wind strength, then your latent concentration of pollutant. Relative humidity, that will indicate if an environment is more down or less down. And stability. So there are some indices that we can create based on those variables that model is output. So more of model operation runs. This is a 1 kilometer. This is to capture very complex topography in South. This is between Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. There is a nuclear power plant that needs very detailed information of wind and temperature in that region. So we have daily runs of 1 kilometer over a certain area. This is 50 kilometer runs. It runs to 10 days, 11 days actually. So it's actually a medium range at high resolution. This is used by the energy sector for planning energy distribution in the country. And there's another product that it's on research experimental stage. These are the seasonal forecasts. It's to fill the gap between what we call weather forecast, like up to 10 days, to seasonal forecast that goes to 6 months or 4 months. So the sub-seasonal is in between, but it goes about 30 to 60 days. So the users have been feeling some need of information in between them. Because you can, for weather forecast, is for action tomorrow, very near actions. A seasonal forecast is for mostly used for planning, a seasonal planning ahead. And the sub-seasonal is really filling the gap For instance, if you want something like next month, in terms of energy, agriculture, I can think of, like in agriculture, they can collect more, say, if they know that the next month there's going to have or less or more precipitation, a certain crop may require some, to bring some more things for protecting or not losing so much water, or they will need more water, they may request more water in the area because they may be in a 30-day time, there may be less precipitation. So it's a planning ahead that in a weather forecast you don't need. In a weather forecast you can say, oh, tomorrow we are going to throw some, they call it like fungicides, but that's for very short. Yeah. Oh, because they have to spray the fungicide. But if they know that there's going to be a lot of disease for the next month, they have to buy more fungicide. But that's not done in a week's time or 2 or 3 days time. So you can check that, you can have an idea that the actions have different planning. The information can be used for actions of different plannings. So sub-seasonal, this is an idea like a month. This is observations of penetration of passage of cold fronts along the coast. And the blue one is precipitation of cold fronts from the model in a sub-seasonal run. So it gives an idea, it's not perfect, but give you an idea, a statistical idea of the passage of the cold fronts. So the idea of some coming towards lower latitudes and approximately the number of cold fronts. But you won't have them happening on the same day or same time. There's no more what we call this type of predictability. But it gives an idea. So this is seasonal forecast. What we have in seasonal forecast, we normally forecast the anomaly of temperature, anomaly of precipitation. In a seasonal range, like 4 months ahead, you want to, you don't really get you cannot have as much, you can't have accurate information of precipitation at a certain place. Normally people want to have an idea of the signal, if it's going to be above average or below average. So then that's the product we provide, anomaly forecast. So like the negative is below average precipitation and blue is above average over here. But how to get this anomaly? You have to have a forecast, it's a seasonal forecast, this one here. And this one here is a model. We have done what we call hindcast. We run 10 years or 30 years in the back and we construct model climatology. We want to know what model sees as climate. And it may have its errors. So this is the model climate, and this is what is forecasting for that season. So if you compare this with this, it's indicating that it will be less precipitation in this region compared to what it sees as a climate. So this is how we do for seasonal forecasts. And this is done every month. We run global model and coupled with ocean, and then we do downscale at the 40 kilometers. So for climate change, we have produced these, what we call also downscaling. We have these global models. We took 4 global models that are in the IPCC. That's for AR5, the previous one. They're working on AR6 now, but this was from AR5. We have these 4 global models and 2 emission scenarios. So high emissions, 8.5 is the high emission, 4.5, RCP 4.5 is moderate. And so these are like 8 scenarios. 4 global models and 2 levels of emission scenarios from each one. And we downscaled to 20 kilometers at this domain. This domain also covers the Central America. We have provided some data for people from Costa Rica as well. And then we did a second downscaling and second nesting for this domain that covers southeast of Brazil. There's a little bit of Bahia, but it's very near the border.
Only for Southeast?
It used to be small, and then we increased it because people from the capital complained that we hadn't left them out. So we ran again. So this is the domain of 5 kilometer resolution that we have run. The run starts from 1960, and it goes up to 2099, so end of the century. We have saved at every 3 hours in this domain, all of them, every 3 hours, and there are 8 scenarios. And this one also only has 2 scenarios, only has 1 global model with 2 levels of emission, because it's a lot more computer consuming. But it was used for people working with impacts in cities, because previously they had done some work for metropolitan areas using a 40 kilometer. 40 kilometers is very coarse for the city, and then we used for 5 kilometers in this area. So this is an example of projection for up to the end of the century. So we had 8 options. From the 8 options, we checked what was smaller change and larger change of the number of heat waves.
Wow.
So the red means that there will be increase of the days of the heat wave. But heat wave compared to the reference climate, the current climate. So when we run from 1960 to 2000, the period from 1960 to 1990, the 30 years, 60 to 1990, we took as a reference to reproduce the current climate, current levels of CO2 gases. And so it is, this change is with respect to the percentile, 95 percentile of the current climate, not of the future, but of the current. Otherwise, this number would be small. It's compared, if the current climate in a certain area, certain place, 1 point, is, say, the 95 percentile is like 32 degrees, so it is 32 degrees counted for the future.
It's not pre-industrial, sorry to interrupt, but it's not pre-industrial historical.
No, pre-industrial use the gases it was lower.
So it's like a 30-year moving average from present.
Yeah, yeah. We are using concentration of more current, like 350 parts per million.
Okay.
CO2 gases, and then the scenario just climbs up.
So there is already some change, like because there is already like some climate change happening, and then just on top of it, that's.
Well, there can be some current climate change,
right. Okay.
but that is not considered.
Okay.
Not compared with pre-industrial, like 280 parts per million CO2. No, we take the like 300. I think it was 350 or 380 CO2. I have to check it. And we also climbed up the climate very little within the current period. It changes very little, but it changes very rapidly more towards the end of the century. So this is compared using the CO2 gases of the IPCC protocol. We're using those. And then from the eight runs we had, because we use high emission and low emission and 4 global models, so we had 8 options of climate change. So from those 8, we chose what was changing less and what was changing the most, just to give an idea of the interval of the changes.
Kind of best and worst scenario.
Something like that, or smaller change and larger change. It's like to give an idea of the uncertainty, because there is uncertainty also in the emission scenarios, and there is uncertainty of the model runs, of the model sensitivity from those levels of concentration. So some models respond warming a lot, some models respond warming slowly, although they are using same levels of concentration of gases.
What's the scale here? Is it 100%?
Number of days. This is number of days. So when this very dark means almost every day in the
end of the world.
yeah, but because it exceeded the 95 percentile, so all the days are just exceeding. Every day is exceeding the percentile. That's in the end of the century. But that's because the gases, they are at a level like 4 times CO2 is like 1,200 parts per million at the end of the century. It's very high. So the model is just responding to very high concentrations. It just warms. It's normal. If it would be cooling, it would be strange. So that is the correct thing to do. It is warm. But some models respond warming stronger, and some warms not as strong. So we say there is high sensitivity or low sensitivity to greenhouse gases. So we are saying low sensitivity. So this is another one I put here, like a CDD, consecutive dry days. So in red are the areas where the consecutive dry days will become longer and longer. And the blue are areas where they will be shorter.
And the top and the bottom, I mean, it's different.
The top, we are looking at the highest, more positive range, or higher, and the lower is the lower part of the changes. So we look at the smaller changes and the larger changes. The idea is to produce like a bar of uncertainty. But they're mixing all the uncertainty, emission and climate models.
But I'm reading that the red areas, that means that the number of days without rain will increase. Is that?
Of the number of consecutive days.
Of consecutive days without increase. Without rain.
Precipitation, yeah.
Okay, the drought season is larger and larger.
Yeah, so you can have longer periods without rain.
Okay.
Is it possible to use multiple indices together? For example, consecutive dry days together with consecutive heat wave, for example, something like that.
Yeah, you can use.
But they don't have any type of issue. They don't have like some type of correspondence that's if you use one, you cannot use the other one.
No,
or
no,
not,
you
like
can.
that. Okay.
It will depend on your interpretation.
Right.
Yeah, you can use, but you will have to be careful on interpretation. That would be good. And all this data, this is policy of INPI, the data we produce operationally or as a production is open. So these data, I don't mean all of them, but most of them are on this web, on this server. This server is actually more appropriate for a smaller data set. The server is small. So if you want a bigger data set, like covering the whole continent, then you'd better request, or we can send the data on a disk. Because it's of these runs we made, we have about 300 terabytes of data. So it's a lot of data to transfer on FTP or even in a server like that. This server is good for a smaller area. If you want in a city or metropolitan area, you can extract in a time series. And one of the options here is CSV. One of the options is also a GeoJSON. Then you can put on a georeference software. you can choose the format. It's only Portuguese. So you can choose like the city or latitude, longitude. So the data is open. Even if you want a larger data set, then you need to write to us because on a server like that, it's difficult to transfer. So even over the internet, you may block because we don't have yet a very good system block server. This is a very small server, but at least something is output there and you can use. So this is there.
Sorry, Chou. And the finest resolution is 5.5.
5. They're all here. You can look for them. Like for instance, it's a 20 kilometer RCP 4.5 continental scale mirror, the Japanese. Then if you click here, you'll find the Canadian, the Brazilian, and the Hagen, the British, and the resolutions that are available.
Okay, this is open, anyone can ask for
Yeah,
that? Yeah.
anyone can enter. And the other thing is the variable. We only allow one variable at a time, so we have to enter again and again. But also these extreme indices, they have been calculated. Like WSDI, the heat wave, they are calculated there.
And it's possible to get information for the present and for climate change.
Yeah, then for the current you have to look for, not RCP, you have to look for historical. Historical goes up to 2005 for AR5. 2005. 2006 they already start in the AR5. 2006 starts the scenarios, RCPs. But what I recommend in general, when you do this, you look at you have to look into statistical properties. Don't look at the year. For instance, if you look at the historical, you will not have the El Nino, which is a very large signal of anomaly in the planet. It will not happen on the 1982 or 1994, the years of the El Nino. But what you will find, it will have a very similar frequency. For instance, if these 30 years there were like 7 El Ninos, these runs normally will have like 6 or 5 underestimated. So it's close, but it's not, and they will not happen on the same years. So what you look for is statistics. So it should not look like, oh, what's going to happen on the year 2040. No, look at the window, like a 30-year window, and look at the statistics of centered around the 40s. And normally we recommend like 30 years, but some people work with 20 years, 10 years plus. So never correlate with a single year. The idea is to count, to do statistics. Okay? So, and then the idea is to check. Now climate, this is the concept of climate change. The statistics of the variables are changing. The statistical properties are changing. So you look at the statistical properties. Okay? So this is an idea of what I had produced. And so the data available. Thank you very much.
There's 2 more questions.
Yes.
The first one is, why was 4.5 and 8.5, but not the first one? The
2.6.
Yeah, the 2.6 was. It's just not. Or yeah.
I think 2.6 is very optimistic, and 8.5 is actually more, at least in the beginning of this period, it's more close to reality, because the measurements have shown that we are tracking the 8.5 concentrations so far.
So it does make more sense to just use 4.5 and 8.5.
Yeah, 2.6 I think is very optimistic. We would have to look for more data sets, because to gather these global model data to make them available is quite a hard work. To download all those data. In general, when we had this NIROC 5 or HiGen, was because we had a colleague that helped us to it was from the British BADC, what's it called? British Atmospheric Data Center in next name. What's it called? No, not Exeter. It's near Reading. No. This BADC used to be near Reading, and I had a colleague who copied all. I think I had like 4 or 6 hard disks in my luggage because it takes a while to download. So it would be much faster because I was traveling, passing by, and this colleague copied all that. Atmospheric Data Center. So he had copied this 8.5 because most of the people were running 8.5 and 4.5. So it's more, there is also a little bit of the help of what is easier to be available.
And just quickly, my second question. So you were saying something about a finer resolution of 1:1 that was done for. So is there any downscaling for finer resolution for Brazil or for certain areas in Brazil, or the maximum that you can get is really 5.5?
We have done higher, 1 kilometer, but shorter run. It was a continuous, like 8 years. We were checking deforestation patterns in the Amazon. Because in the Amazon, many numerical experiments have done large patches of deforestation, whereas it's normally not like that. They are done either in streets, like we call it fishbone pattern, and that's not captured in 100 or 200. So we did very high to 1 kilometer, so that was captured. But it's very computer consuming. We did like 8 years just to check the past, to understand the past. We were checking this idea that when you deforest, you can increase runoff. So it's very complicated question because you can start cutting a lot so you can have more energy. So we try to look at this issue with this numerical experiment. But in terms of this IPCC protocol, the 5 kilometer is what we have available here. We have done higher, we have done 4 kilometers for some other experiments, but here for Brazil is 5 kilometers.
Here, only small divided.
Yeah, my question is about that. I'm curious about execution time and accuracy of your models. Do you have any published paper or more detailed information on how your model works and how long does it take to run your model and execution time?
We published an evaluation for the historical period, so we compare with observation data. Models, they are not perfect. There are errors, like precipitation underestimate in the Amazon region, which is very common in many models. Overestimate of temperature in the, for instance, like north of Argentina, there's a Chaco area, Chaco, they call it Chaco. There's an overestimate of temperature there. But it's a, for instance, like it's an overestimate of 2 degrees. It's not that serious, 2 degrees on average.
Do you have all these?
So that's published.
Okay. Do you have all these uncertainties mapped into your model? It's easy to map all the uncertainties.
We published in a continental scale. But some people, they have some other additional data at local scale, and they have done their own evaluation. Like there was some work done over some basins, river basins, and they had some other data. And then they had done their own evaluation because they probably had a more detailed observation.
Yeah.
I mean, I know this is Brazil, but because I'm from the Caribbean, I just want to know, I saw a lot of the Caribbean islands included in some of these models. Would some of your data be able, or can you share some of this with the Caribbean counterparts?
It's over there in that, that domain. It's available in that platform.
Okay.
Yeah, you can.
And about historical data, Joe, it's possible to recover this data historically? for example, because in health you work a lot with longitudinal perspective, yeah? How things changes and how this impacts on health. You can think historically for the future, to follow them, but also you can think on the past, yeah? Because you can have a follow-up of the past.
Yeah.
It's possible to recover these models or this data historically for a series of years or things like that.
The model runs, what we call it historical runs, they are model output. So you cannot correlate immediately to what happened on that year or that moment. You would need observations, past observations. We have at CPTEC some data set that mention about observations of the past, of precipitation, for instance. We have constructed like a data set since 1998 of precipitation, gridded precipitation. There are gridded precipitation from some satellite, some other data set. This comparison here was using what we call CRU, which is a 50 kilometer, but it's monthly. But we have at CPTEC like a daily precipitation gridded at 20 kilometer grid box. And now because it was a mix of observation from weather stations, some weather stations, not all weather stations, whatever reached CPTEC. So some weather stations with observations, we gridded it. So it's easier for the users to use in a regular grid. And that is merged with satellite information. So we call it merge data, merge precipitation data. That I think we have since 98 or 2000, around that period, up to present. But presently, there was a change in the satellite. So people changed the resolution of this merge data. We call it merge at CPTEC. And we have increased to 10 kilometers. But this is very recent, like 1 year ago, a new satellite. It's a mix of surface observation with satellite estimated precipitation, and then we call it merge. It's a data set. It's like an alternative of the other data sets. The hard thing is that all these data sets, none of them are exactly the same. So it's part of the uncertainty of the observations. And for precipitation, normally we use all of them.
See, but in theory, it's possible to build the
Fast.
sequence of information, historical, of any of these.
But I better not use model, not these projections,
The actual
but
readings.
observations.
Okay.
Real observation, so you can correlate with your health data.
And it's possible, CPTEC keep it part of this.
Yeah, we can make available precipitation and some gradient of temperature. Temperature is very poor. Precipitation is better. But we can provide this gridded data set. We cannot provide from the weather service. Weather service data, you have to ask the weather service. But we receive, but we cannot forward those data. But you can receive. But the difference is that the weather service is point data, and we have graded it, so it's easier
You estimate
to
it
work.
by grade,
Yeah, to work with another data set. It's easier, but it's available. Merge, we call it merge, and whoever would like to have this precipitation rate, and it's every day done. So it's part of our operation. So it's every day updated.
Is that data just for Brazil or the whole of Latin America?
Used to be for South America, but now people reduce to only Brazil because in the whole South America, the data is very irregular. The reception of this data is very irregular. So it's not very regular in Brazil either, but we can redo it. We redo it sometimes. We do it for like every day, this merge, this grid data set, and after 2 days, it's generally redone. because some data may come late. So it's redone. But it's a product, compared to some data set, it's a product that's quite very operational, very updated, I would say updated. Compared to some other sources, I think it's the most updated in terms of graded data, graded data set, observational data set, I think. And it's available, so if you're writing, I can forward to our colleague that can provide these graded data set.
Okay. Thank you, Chou. Utilizing climate information for health outcome insight from Erick.
So I have to follow that. That's amazing. Very good. But it's kind of good timing how you guys did it, because I think a lot of what I will do will sort of touch on some of what you've done. And you have to enable something.
Não está, Catarina. Cancela isso aí, César. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm going to take you guys to the Caribbean now, just a little bit. So this is interesting being here and listening to everything that's being presented so far. Initially I was thinking, okay, maybe I might have lessons to share with you all, but I think I'm receiving a lot of lessons to take back, which is actually hopefully part of the process here too. So I am a researcher at Grantham. I work with Anna, but also James, and my interest is on using climate information for adaptation. A lot of my past work was on resilience and disaster risk reduction, so you'll see a lot of flavors coming in here. But the central topic of my conversation today is about climate information, explaining what this is, understanding how it's being used for risk-informed decisions generally, but also specifically for health outcomes in the Caribbean. And I'll try to scratch the surface of South-South learning in this context. This is not a presentation of my research, unfortunately. This is just skimming through a lot of information that's been shared and being done within the Caribbean with a view to sort of explain, give insights, offer perspectives, but also see if there can be some tangible outputs moving forward. So some critical questions that I think of here, and I use this in other presentations as well. Why should we focus on climate information? We've talked a lot about climate generally, but just this is going a bit more deeper into information and services specifically, using it to assist, as I said, DRR, resilience, but also climate change adaptation. How it's been used for health outcomes specifically, and again, can we share lessons across spaces? So climate information. So I think it's been brilliant that, again, I follow after you because this is quite exciting to hear about all of the different products, different data being shared and collected within Brazil and, of course, other countries. Climate information is something a bit more, I guess it's as I said in the second point, information vis-a-vis data implies it has meaning and relevance in a given context. It's a bit more than just data. It describes historical, current, and future climate conditions in a specific locale along different time scales, and it's traditionally for decision-making purposes. So what it is here, it's different. It's just this massive look at historical observations, current climate, going into seasonal or sub-seasonal to seasonal weather forecasts moving forward, but also within this climate projection sphere. So it's quite a wide range when we talk about climate information. Climate services, has anyone here used or heard the term? Okay, great. This is activities that deal with generating and providing this climate information to different users. Again, in this very holistic decision-making platform purpose outlook, right? So it's derived from climate information to assist individuals and organizations to make improved decisions. So this is some, I think it's kind of nice to, again, touch on what she was talking about here. These are some of the climate information products that we can utilize different decision-making sort of outcomes moving forward. So say in the short term, the sort of use of weather information, traditionally, so you think about observed and forecasted rainfall and temperature, early morning of extreme events. The kinds of short-term discussions you can use this data for would be like DRM decisions, disaster risk reduction, or disaster risk management decisions to protect people and infrastructure. This is like really short-term. I know this data is, I know something is happening within this very short period ahead. These are decisions that I can make in this very short-term perspective. Communicating and responding in the short term. You also have sub-seasonal, which you talked about, maybe 2 weeks to 2 months, or you said 90 days, you know, moving that in that sort of time frame, moving forward. This is when you start stocking essential supplies. You think, okay, something is happening, I might know something is happening within this time frame. These are certain kinds of decisions I can make within that. I revise my evacuation plans. I think about water resource management. These are some fundamental decisions that can be made along that time frame. And then you move on to seasonal again. It could be longer if you think about climate change projections. Let's think about just greater than 2 months, greater than 3 months. This is like investments on irrigation and drainage systems. I know something's happening. In the short term, I can say, okay, a flood is coming, maybe you need to protect some of your assets. But in the longer run, if I think it's going to be an unseasonably wet season ahead, I can say maybe you might want to think about either moving to different crops, or in other conditions saying, okay, you need to think about irrigation and drainage systems. So these are some of the types of decisions that you can make along different time scales.
Batteries.
I'm going to move to the side. That's okay. Thank you. So this is just another illustrative framework to think about. Thank you. Think about using climate information in this multi-scalar decision-making platform. So on the horizontal axis, you see climate information facilitating short-term action towards long-term action. And then on the vertical axis, it's from coping, so again, this resilience thought process, all the way up to adaptation. So there are different types of using information within different time periods. This is not a lesson really in climate information, but I think it's just interesting to realize, again, given that we've talked a lot about this data, understanding it in this informational context and understanding how this data can be utilized for certain decisions based on where you sit, based on the type of priorities you have, based on the outcomes you wish to achieve. I'm going to spend a few minutes maybe just understanding the Caribbean context. I know this is, again, a session on Brazil, but it might be good just to think outside, and maybe that sort of reflection might help us think inwardly. Caribbean is very prone to many natural hazards. Disasters really fare terribly within our region. And I mean, this is data from MDAT, so there are caveats. Sorry, can you see? There are caveats in terms of how you define and assimilate this data, but we find generally that hydro, meteorological, climatological disasters tend to be the brunt of the disasters that take place within the region. I think almost 90% of all people affected are affected by some type of disaster that's climate, quote-unquote, related. This is just how varied it is across the region. Caribbean, as much as we're a very small island, it's a very heterogeneous region. We're not the same, and we're all affected quite differently. This is just a summary chart just showing you how diverse we are and the type of and how disasters affect us generally. So given that, I'm just going to share 2 slides on generally what some of my research is about. This influenced me greatly. This took place, Tropical Storm Erick took place in Dominica in 2015. This is a radar map just showing just the storm approaching. Dominica is the one little circled in black there, that little tiny island. They woke up the next morning after it hit, saying we had no idea this was happening. We did not know a storm was coming. Anybody else who would have seen this map the night before would have probably thought, this doesn't look good. Something might be happening. I don't know what. It might be happening. Dominica, unfortunately, was not as aware of it. And I'm not going into details of how information was shared. My interest was more about moving forward. How can I prevent this from happening in the future? And it's about communicating climate information, communicating storm advisories, communicating particular challenges that could be potential threats. And in this context, Dominica was not informed. I began to wonder how many other countries weren't informed ahead of time. Oh, I thought you had a question. I was getting excited. So I started to think about lead times, how long a country has in advance of a storm hitting. Can anyone guess how long on average across the region there is between the first storm advisory and when a storm ultimately hits?
20 hours.
20? Who said that? Good guess. Very close. 20 hours is about 23 hours. Just under a day. So think about how a tiny island, very insufficient resources, little infrastructure, little planning, finance, people, can take action in less than 24 hours. God forbid it happened on a Sunday, and I saw how you Brazilians do things on a Sunday. It's very similar in the Caribbean. That means preparedness has to be constantly ongoing. So I started to become involved in why and how do we use climate information more widely. Another thing kind of stems from what you were talking about before, this idea of what information is available and how we start to ground truth information. How do we take information from all of these? So this is a map of Jamaica showing 59 rain gauge stations, and it's sort of piecemeal across the years. It's not like a full, complete data set, but it doesn't tell a particular full story of how local data is relevant within each of the particular locales. And we started to think about, okay, well, can we use satellite sources? Everybody says, yes, well, there's satellites, just use satellites. Well, there's tons of different products available. We needed to figure out, can we ground truth this to a local scale to better understand what was the potential change for Jamaica. I can't overestimate it, I can't underestimate it. I need to have some credible range of what might happen to make my preparedness, my early warning system a bit more effective. So this is some research that a colleague of mine had done, just sort of taking, I think this is from chirps precipitation, so taking some information and looking at it across months to understand, okay, what, instead of using just rain gauges, which are very sparse, can we use satellite estimates for it? This is just, I think, IRI. So I worked a bit with the International Research Institute for Climate and Society at Columbia, and they've also produced a lot of maps throughout the region to just better understand precipitation changes and precipitation trends over time. Another thing that we did was create a massive database of climate information products that could be used for different decisions in the entire Caribbean. So for example, you see there's a lot of rainfall, different types of rainfall source, satellite sources. We have surface soil moisture, and so forecast, global drought, flood forecasting, food insecurity, emergency data, knowledge portal. So there are tons of different types of data that exist. And I think one of the challenges is one, knowing that this exists, and then two, using it for something. For a lot of people in the Caribbean, just this first part of knowing what was existing was a big problem. So we were trying to just at least showcase some of this information with them. Moving on to connecting it. So I presented that there's a lot of information within the region, a bit sparse, and we need to kind of connect the dots. One of the ways that they're trying to connect the dots, and it kind of helps me that this topic is on health, is on Caribbean health. And this is a Caribbean Health Climatic Bulletin. That's a joint effort of the Caribbean Public Health Agency, the Pan American Rural Health Organization, so PAHO, and the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. And it aims to bring people information to make better decisions about particular climate conditions within the Caribbean. So it's intended to guide strategic and operational decisions related to health interventions. So this is an example of a 3-month outlook. So it's a very seasonal forecast that's being done. This is not on the realm of climate change projections yet, but we're trying to think about this context of resilience and encouraging our own local resilience in the context of a changing climate. So for example, this is a 3-month outlook that I'm going to show you, and they're suggesting that health stakeholders combine this 3-month outlook within this bulletin with historical data, but also weather data, because you need to be aware and concerned about all of the different parameters moving forward. So 2 things. What are the key climate messages? So the climate scientists are able to share this information. The health side, what are the health implications of this? So this is how it sort of looks. It's a bulletin that goes out, and it's been going on for the past 3 years, every 3 months. Okay, so this is what we're thinking of seeing. There's a steady decrease in frequency of wet days. So again, a lot of the things that you were mentioning, we think that there's a short-term drought, there's some persistent rainfall focus totals from December indicate drier than usual. So they're using climate data and climate information to really tell the story about this is potentially what might happen 3 months out. It could change, weather can change differently. This is what we're thinking based on climatological models. This is what we're based on what we think is going to happen on forecasts ahead. But also, this is what we're thinking in terms of health. So it's specifically saying, I see the climate parameters, I see the potential forecast that's happening in the next 3 months. It's not about how do I then target it to different users. For this one, it's the health sector. Respiratory illness, which I thought was really fascinating, is the first one. And you all are very interested in this health aspect here. So maybe in this next 3 months, there are less frequent episodes of Sahara dust. So if you were affected by it, you should be careful. There's increased humidity in some areas to promote mold down. Poorly, so they're really painting the story of, hey, if this was a problem for you, or for your sort of the people that you work with, you might want to think about how this particular forecast might change. So there's gastrointestinal illness, non-communicable diseases, vector-borne illness, of course, and well-being and mental health. So I think some of you touched on things that would have been key parts of health outcomes and health challenges within Brazil, but also Ecuador. This is how the Caribbean is sort of taking this climate data, translating it into appropriate climate-based health decisions, and then sharing this with community leaders, with certain government agencies, disaster agencies, so then they can make appropriate decisions for early warning systems within their particular locales. So Sahara dust I mentioned it's a huge thing in the Caribbean. I'll mention it after. I'm wondering if it's a big thing here too. So right now, and I mean when I say right now, this was like last week or within the last few weeks. Apparently there's just a lot of Sahara dust affecting many Caribbean islands. Usually there tends to be a big event somewhere in the I guess later on in the year from April onwards, but they're surprised that it's happening now. And so they're really warning people, okay, if you have challenges, respiratory ailments, asthma effect, there is something happening, so just please be aware, take appropriate action, take appropriate measures, just be aware of it. So I think this level of awareness and in communicating risk using climate information to do so is being really tangible within the region, and I think this is one great example, I think, of this. So they also monitor Sahara dust. So they talk about it, but so they monitor it in certain ways. So yes, this is something that has affected other countries across the world. Dust concentration in the Caribbean has often exceeded US EPA particulate matter 2.5. So in combination with air pollution, localized air pollution, because of urban development and whatnot, Sahara dust tends to exacerbate sometimes ongoing existing conditions. We don't have routine air quality control mechanisms, so monitoring and using satellite estimates to help us with that has been something that the CIMH has really been actively working on. This is just a model showing, I think this is for the next 7 days, this was done probably late January. This is just showing how the dust model looks like moving ahead. And again, if you think you're in a country that's going to be severely affected by it, you make your decisions just wisely. The CIMH does not have a mandate to make predictions, does not have a mandate to tell countries what to do, it is merely sharing information. But I think this is a great example of how, they are expecting or anticipating potential problems in the health sector and understanding what climate and climate information can do to sort of minimize the risk associated with what particular health challenges may be moving forward. It's just a map showing 2.5. And I thought it was fascinating because it does seem to have some influence, at least in the top of Brazil there. Of course, we have lots of challenges with vector-borne diseases. And so the IRI has, you should take a picture of this for me for them. IRI has teamed up with IRAP. So IRAP is a USAID project focused on minimizing risks and challenges within the Americas, really. And so they've done this map room to think about monitoring and forecasting diseases transmitted by the Aedes mosquito. So it incorporates different suitability models. So this is the R0 model. And they think about environmental suitability for vector-borne diseases. So it considers climate factors, disease presence, mosquito presence, and the life cycle. So this is a map that they've had now, and right now it's in beta mode, so it's not necessarily available, but I'll tell you up front that we've already asked them if it will be possible for Brazil, and they're quite excited to think about chatting with whoever wants to chat. It just needs a bit of interaction and motivation to make this happen. But this is how it could possibly look for Brazil. I found this on the thing. So you see, like, these are different types of climate factors and different inputs that go into it, and they calculate different R0 values in terms of how transmissible the disease could be based on historical but also possible conditions. I will admit and say I don't know as much as I should about the model. I will be happy to direct you to people who will know more. So South-South learning lessons. So there's tons of research done in Brazil. This is like something I put on before I even heard about the number of research efforts that's been going on here. It is amazing and exciting to be in a room that I can hear all of these options and possibilities. But I know that you're looking for more information and you're looking for more connections. And so when I found out, and I was looking at the Climate Health Bulletin and I saw so much about Sahara dust, and I was like, and I saw the tip of, or the northern area of Brazil being affected. When you look at this, I don't think this video will show, but in the YouTube link you can see it. The Sahara dust is such an important fertile component of the Amazon. So I'm not sure of if there is this consideration of health outcomes based on Sahara dust. Given the challenges within the Caribbean, I'm wondering if it's something of interest, but I certainly understand if not. There's tons of different models that are running. I know you've shared some, I think others have shared some. I think this is something that's, the more information you have, the more challenging it is to sift through and figure out which is the most valuable and useful to you, and I'm not positing this one as the best one, but it's just good to know and have this information that something might exist. Purple air, somebody told me about this air quality monitoring system. It's not very detailed and widespread, but it could be something to complement the work that's already been going on. Sorry, Ecuador, it's not here, but Brazil, I see a few spots that are available. I see also some.
I think ProQuart is one that you can actually put monitors,
Yeah.
and then you feed information to the system. You put in monitors, whatever you want, and then you feed it.
And then you,
Yeah.
so you again, so there's.
It's very interesting.
The thing is, it's just that there's a lot of, the idea of me sharing this is not to say this is the best, but that there is a lot of information that maybe even collating, again, the idea and the sort of message for the day is how do we sort of always put together and connect the dots between all of this massive amounts of information. Again, this is another one, fire emissions. I think Anna and I were chatting about just whether or not something like this would be helpful. And I put all the links here for you to see and utilize moving forward. One thing, I don't want to spend too much time. So MDAT, I tend to use this database a lot. Not that it's the best, but it's a good source of me to get at least a conservative estimate of how disasters are affecting certain countries. And I've used it for most of the Caribbean, and I hold it up for Brazil. It's all free data. And it has different criteria that defines what a disaster is, as I mentioned before, which is here. I saw here that in terms of extreme temperature, cold waves seem to affect not only people affected, but also a high number of damages. I don't know, I don't have detailed information on this, and I thought it was just something very fascinating. Drought is obviously something that tends to affect Brazilian communities a bit often. I was just looking for insights to help me figure out connecting the dots between what has happened in the past and what might be helpful in terms of climate information moving forward. Oh yeah, I just did this in terms of, this is it by total economic damages, just direct. So you see drought and floods really dominate the disasters that top the economic damages. But in terms of people affected, it's actually almost similar. Still, it's just interesting to know and move forward. My last two slides. I think you all are doing such a great job of understanding the connection between health and climate, and I think maybe one particular way forward is to think about these priority areas, either based on research objectives, government objectives, policy particular objectives, but this might be something to at least start from, otherwise it's just going to be like so much to do. Data availability, we've been talking a lot about data, and I see there's a lot of connections between ministerial websites and providing this data and free of charge, which is amazingly awesome. I think it's important to understand what's there, collating what's available, timelines, time scales, resolutions, to realize, okay, what could be possible in terms of a research or a policy frontier forward. Awareness of this climate information, maybe connecting to the IRI. They've been always excited to work with international partners on this. Impact data. I always find this is very something very core to the Caribbean perspective as well. The MDAT database is by no means the best database for understanding what has been happening within any part of the world. However, it's the closest because impact data is actually very difficult to find. Caribbean is no exception, and I'm not sure about Brazil. In the Caribbean now, we're thinking of having this Caribbean impacts database to really sort of merge with MDAT and really understand local particularities of who's affected, gender, age, all of these different things. We just don't know. So making decisions forward, it's crucial to know, not only what might happen in terms of the climate, but who are the vulnerable populations that we need to be catering for. Developing and utilizing climate information more effectively. So one thing that I found in reading a lot of things is that, the health community and the climate community seem to be so intertwined, but don't always communicate all the time in terms of what the climate scientists produce and what might be good for a health outcome and what might be interesting for a health outcome that could be driven by climate availability needs. So for example, we spend a lot of time looking at rainfall estimates, but maybe we also need to think about different types of satellites, different types of climate information, which might be better proxies instead of just only thinking and focusing on rainfall, for example. Locally validating. So ground truthing is such an essential part of climate information, and we're just not investing as much in it, and integrating this with disaster management agencies. So this is a book. I don't know if anybody has seen it. It's written by two scientists at IRI. Madeline Thompson, some of the health scientists might know her name. She's now at Wellcome Trust in the UK. But Simon Mason is a brilliant climate scientist based at Columbia. And they've written this book aimed both at the public health professionals and the climate communities to raise this awareness. And again, it says here, climate communities focus heavily on developing forecasts, but you need improved historical and real-time monitoring information and services. At the seasonal scale, again, the primary focus is on forecasting rainfall, but you may need data for temperature and humidity. Understanding this context is important. And this book, it's I think, quite interesting, and I'm happy to connect you to some of the researchers if you would like. It looks at the connections, these health priorities, climate information at different time scales. Again, understanding what information is necessary, what information is available, might actually be quite helpful moving forward. Regional partnerships are always a good thing. This is why I was asking, if there's work done in the Caribbean, maybe there's something that the Caribbean can share with you. This climatic health bulletin could be something that could be done for Brazil if it hasn't been done already. This is a big part of CARICOF. So the COF is the Climate Outlook Forum that's done on a regional basis. So the Caribbean Climate Outlook Forum is something that's really been developing a lot of energy and momentum over the past few years to bring together not only the climate community within the region, but many sectors that are influenced by the climate. Health, agriculture, tourism, disaster management. So twice a year, we bring them together for the wet season and the dry season to think about, okay, this is the climate outlook forward. What are the types of decisions we need to be making in each of our sectors moving forward? I know that there's a COF that's particular for Brazil, and that's the Regional Climate Outlook Forum for Southeast and South America. Maybe it might be interesting to see if this could be a forum to really start to get the ball rolling or start talking about these linkages. Map rooms. So again, I suggested the partners on this 80s map room. So Angel Munoz and Laurel De Serra, they're at IRI, and again, they're quite excited in case anybody wants to talk to them about models moving forward. Sahara dust, I don't know, could be something of interest. Air pollution research. This is another researcher at Columbia who's interested in doing ground truth data on air quality, air pollution. He's doing it right now in, I think, some parts in Africa. I want to say Ghana, but I'm not sure. He's excited to think about utilizing it his model and his techniques in other parts of the world. Again, just in terms of networking and sharing information with you guys, this is what this presentation was really all about. So that's it. Yeah.
How do you think about shifting baselines for some of this kind of information? Because as people no longer find the higher temperatures as notable, does it still make sense to tell them about it?
You mean in terms of for heat waves?
For changes in the weather that people are experiencing. As it dries out in an area, when do you stop reporting that it's drying out, or do you ever stop reporting that it's much drier than it would have been?
The weird thing is that I don't think in the models and the maps that I've seen before, I don't think there's been this trend or evolution towards this sense of this baseline is massively changing. It still seems to be quite evolving, and we're still learning who responds well to what. So I don't think just yet. But you're right, in the future and as things change, you may need to consider how do you adjust some of this language and some of these communication techniques to be a bit more effective and useful. Well, I'm here, so no worries. Oh, sorry.
A curiosity
Oh,
about
sorry.
the influence of this dust flow from Sahara. This changes along the year, the amount, because of the change of the equator.
Yeah.
No? So it must be more severe now in the summer, and less in our winter.
So yeah, I think it is supposed to be less in your winter. It's weird because I was trying to figure out if there was a map that would actually show what it is. One of the links that I put in it is from the TNT Weather Center, and they actually said something I guess the opposite, because this is your summer. So in the winter, which would be over like the April, May, June, something around there, actually seems to be higher. I'm not sure of the mechanism why, and I think I didn't find any actual research documentation to find out. We can chat about it and figure out what's going on. I actually reached out to the dust center prediction people to figure out if there's something I can talk to them, like to get more detailed information. They didn't respond in time. But if this was something of interest to you, learning more, I'm sure we can connect the dots there and get you that information in more detail. But is this something that you have thought about? I don't know if I just missed it.
It's not meant, I mean,
Yeah.
in Brazil, I mean, we never discussed the Saharan dust here because, first, as you show, I mean, it's mostly on the northeast or north of Brazil, and you know, larger cities than southern or even here. But I mean, I don't think Prince Salvador is affected by the Saharan dust, and I don't know if anyone has measured. I mean, the effect of it. Never heard anything in Brazil about it.
Same. So it just struck me how much of a challenge it is in the Caribbean, and not just in the Eastern Caribbean, it's also in the Western Caribbean, which so it means it moves far. It could be something of interest.
And it might hit, you know, the southern west states as well, like Florida.
Yeah, exactly. And so I can't remember where they said it, but even parts of Central America, maybe even parts of Mexico, it does travel far. It does settle and accumulate. It exacerbates ongoing local conditions. Given that there is an interest in thinking about localized air pollution here, I'm just wondering if this could be another layer of consideration. And again, if there's an interest, and I'm super happy to connect you to others.
Is this the Harmattan?
Harmattan. So the Harmattan happens at some period. There are two things. Yes, the Harmattan period, it does influence it a lot. There's another period of the year that's actually even worse, which I never knew about. So the Harmattan influences, say like meningitis outbreaks in Western Africa, that's been well documented. The contribution to the Caribbean and say other parts of South America is less sort of known what are essential drivers and what are the impacts.
So there's been no health outcomes associated with it. It's just been observed.
Oh no, there has been health. Yeah, definitely in the Caribbean. They talk about increases in respiratory illness. I think one of the papers that I didn't find much, again, the fortunate and unfortunate thing about the Caribbean is there's little done. From a research point of view, that's amazing. You could probably try to do a lot. from a research point of view, that's terrible because there's very little precedence to think about moving forward on. There's one paper, sorry. There's a paper that was done for Cuba, I think. And I saw that she was looking at questions, and I think I put a link in there. Yeah, so Saharan dust effects on human health, a challenge for Cuba's researchers. So it is something that affects Cuba. And all of these links are just news articles, again, because I couldn't find journal articles even doing much on it. But they all say there's been an uptick in respiratory ailments. As if you are suffering from asthma, please be very careful about breathing. You might have difficulty breathing, just be aware of things like that. So this is definitely a public health concern. It's not researched or documented. These connections aren't as evident as we.
This Sahara things, it is known that happens, it reaches Amazon area, but there's very little data. Not many people working on it. It's known that there is some transport, very little measurement, but I think also measurement is very limited to few groups.
Right.
And also, it's believed to happen together with rain. So it doesn't stay in the air, but it's raining down. There's everyday rain over there.
So
But it needs more study.
right, it does. Because even like this one, I think in the Caribbean, they were saying the more rain, the better it is, because it actually sort of dissipates things.
Rain down.
So I guess it's certainly a localized sort of concern, and you really need to realize the differences across regions. But it was just something to share and say, hey, this is affecting us so much so that there's a whole bulletin that's part of this. If this is something that could be of concern here, I'm happy to share. Yeah.
Okay, Denyse, thank you. Next presentation is Rising, Connecting Deep Health and Economics of Climate Change.
Do you want to go through, or do you want to take a break between the session?
Ok, I think you need to share, não? Tem pessoas seguindo?
Oi?
Tem pessoas seguindo?
Tem.
Então need to share. Você pode share?
It says that.
Mas a gente só share.
No, it says it's
Share
it's paused.
already? No.
Resume share.
No, each time that you change, you need to share.
A tela.
The Zoom.
A tela tá compartilhada para você.
I don't think so. I mean,
A tela tá
Hello,
compartilhada.
it's Ross here. I didn't get the last presentation.
all right.
Are you seeing it now, or are you seeing? What are you seeing?
Now,
This looks okay.
look okay? Okay.
Okay, great. So I wanted to also talk about being a recipient of some of this fantastic weather and climate data and what's been going on in the environmental economics field to try to connect health to both historical and future impacts from heat. Great. Yeah, what do we know about these and how do we know it? Getting into a little bit of the methods that we use, and then what's the potential for adaptation that we see, since that's an area that I've been doing some research in. We know that climate has already changed in a lot of areas. This is a representation of what's been happening to the distribution of climate actually across the world, summer temperatures, from the historical distribution of 1951 to 1980, and as that's shifted over. And the thing I want to pull out here is that there's this right tail that essentially did not exist of high summer temperatures, but is now a significant common part of the temperatures that are experienced every year. And so we want to understand what kind of effect that's going to have. we contributed some of our data to a tool that the New York Times put up, where you put in what town you're born in and what year, and it will tell you what the temperatures were up through the present, and then the projected temperatures, in particular in the form of very hot days in the future. So in 1980, in Salvador, there was about 40 days of temperatures over, days with temperatures over 32 degrees C. Now, or 2 years ago when this report was published, there are about 3 months of, there were 4 months of such temperatures. By the time that I'm about 80, they're going to be, there's basically going to be half the year that is over 32 C in Salvador. And we expect that there are going to be a lot of different dimensions of the direction. It wasn't working a moment ago. Do you think it will work? There are a lot of different dimensions of how heat is associated with changes in mortality. I'll mention some other effects on health outside of mortality, but through its effect on cardiovascular disease, respiratory problems, effects before birth. We see that these are some of the areas that have been researched. We've seen that both cold days and hot days do have consequences for mortality rates, and there are other effects that changing temperatures are going to have on the climate system, which then feed back into effects on mortality. So there are a lot of different possible avenues that we need to be concerned about. No, it's fine. It's fine. One of the key metrics to think about here, which I know was you who mentioned this, for how the human body responds to temperature is what's called the wet bulb temperature. And basically, it's just what it sounds like. You take a thermometer, and whatever it's reading, you wrap the bulb of the thermometer in a wet cloth. And what this does is it allows the thermometer to sweat. There's naturally going to be some amount of evaporation that's going to cool the thermometer, and the temperature that thermometer then reads is going to be the temperature that your body can reduce its heat to, as long as it has water enough to sweat. And that's really important, because if the temperature that your body can reduce its temperature to, the amount that your body can reduce its temperature is still above 35 degrees C, then you will have heat stroke. Your body can't not have heat stroke. We see that even for lower levels of this wet bulb temperature, there are damages to human health. Above about 23 degrees, we start to see an uptick in various respiratory and cardiovascular problems. When you get to some of the hottest days in summer in Brazil, people who are whose health is more sensitive, like older people, immediately start having problems. Above about 30 degrees C, you get into this extremely dangerous zone where it is fatal for people to be exposed to it for any length of time. In particular, above about 30 degrees C wet bulb temperature, if you're out working, your body is going to increase its temperature to the point where it won't be able to regulate it anymore. I was trying to find some data on how wet bulb temperatures were going to vary over the course of the next century, and this is for those two emission scenarios, moderate emissions and high emissions. For a semi-arid region, not too far from here, and this is the average wet bulb temperature across those scenarios, going up from 22 and increasing about 5 degrees C under that high emission scenario. What might be a little bit more interesting is the average number of days that have extremely high wet bulb temperatures. And that's going to go from, well, by construction, about 10% of days have above the 90% percentile of wet bulb temperatures. And holding that level fixed by the end of the century under that high emission scenario, basically every single day is going to be above the 90th percentile of the current level of wet bulb temperatures. So lots of reason to be concerned. So now we want to relate that to health, and there are two basic ways you can imagine doing this. And one is to, if you're interested in mortality, look at death certificates to basically see if people seem to be dying from things that are registered as extreme heat deaths more on hard days. And there's, you'll see this relationship. It's not hard to find. The broader challenge, though, is that there are, as I've mentioned, a lot of other avenues by which people die when there are these higher temperatures. It's not just things that are registered as heat stroke or heat stress. A lot of deaths are going to be attributable to those higher temperatures, but are going to go through people making worse decisions or having other medical problems be exacerbated, or having their immune systems compromised. So we want to look at not just health-related, heat-related deaths, but all deaths. And to do that, we need to get into a little bit of technique. The reason I wanted to walk through this is to sort of help explain how, why it is that economists are even in the business of trying to predict future effects of climate on health. And it comes back to some of the techniques that were developed on how to understand policy decisions. So imagine that we have two different locations. In each of those locations, we have some data on how many people are dying in each year. So this is the temperature for a given location in a given year, and the number of people who died in that year. And this is another location, which here is placed with a higher temperature on average. If you were to just take those two locations, take their average temperature and their average death rate, and draw a line between them, you would get that the hotter place is the place that has fewer deaths, and so higher temperatures cause people to die less. But actually, there are a lot of differences between those locations, including things like income and institutions and culture. And we want to, we don't want to conflate the effect of temperature with the effect of all those other things. So instead, you can go back to this original data, and you can ask how an increase in temperature affects each region individually. So in each of these cases, a local increase in temperature increases the death rate, and that's what we want to use. And we also want to be aware if, for example, a region that is hotter is less sensitive to these higher temperatures, because that would suggest that there's some amount of adaptation that's going on. And then you can sort of piece together from multiple regions, having gone through multiple ranges of temperatures, some sort of response function. And that's what the outcome of this work produces. Functions that are usually nonlinear, they usually have multiple segments, that try to piece together the information from regions of different average temperatures using within region changes of temperature. And so even though you still have all these different effects, they're not going to stop you from getting out this average response curve in the middle. And I'll tell you what that means right here. So the outcome is what we call dose response curve. The curve describes what the response is to a dose of some temperature. So this is, I don't want to choose, anyway, these are each curves that tell you for a given temperature on a given day, what is the average increase or decrease in death rates that you'll get for different age groups. This is newborns, people 1 through 44, older, and the oldest age group. So for example, for this oldest age group, the mortality rate relative to a day at 10C is higher for both colder days and for hotter days. If things are just a little bit warmer than that 10C day, older people tend to stay indoors, they don't do as much, and so you have somewhat lower death rate. But after you get up to about 30 degrees C, you get this precipitous increase in deaths. And this kind of work has been done in Italy, in India, and some other places. I don't know of analysis in Brazil until the work I'm going to show you in a couple slides. The other thing to point out, when we did this for the US, we saw that there's a lot of variation across the US of where people were being affected by these higher temperatures. So this is, by the end of the century, how many additional deaths per 100,000 are we going to see in different regions. And then it's the south of the US that is going to be affected the most, partly because that's the area that is already quite hot. But that's also the area that's quite poor. And so if you look at the change in death rates, this is actually all damages, but it's the same for change in death rates. The change in death rates as broken down by income levels, the people who are poorest have the largest change in death rates. And as you get richer and richer, that change in death rates becomes more and more moderate, and the richest people have the least sensitivity. That's just a function of where people in the US live, but actually we have good reason to believe that it's also going to be a function of the ability of richer people to adapt to higher temperatures. All this time I've been talking about death rates. The same thing is true of morbidity. It's often said for every death, there are something like 10 hospitalizations. For every hospitalization, there are something like 100 sick days of lost work. And so for higher temperatures, this is based on the maximum temperature of the day up to 36 degrees C, you have significant increases in hospital admissions rates. And we also can see it by different kinds of health problems. Each of these boxes, each of these circles is a different effect from a heat wave, the change in incidence of that of respiratory problems, metabolic problems, and so on from a heat wave. The thing I want to show you here is that these change in time. So across the top, just look at the top part. The bottom part is for deaths rather than hospitalization. For the top part, looking at hospitalizations, after you have a single day of a heat wave, you have increases in respiratory problems, metabolic problems, infections, and neoplasms, but not really for, sorry, I got that wrong. It's infections. Infections are the one that you don't see an increase for. Once you get to the fourth day of a heat wave, then in fact the infections dot zooms way up, which means that in those, it takes a few days in many cases for some of these problems to emerge. And so if we want to understand the effect of heat waves on health, we need to look at the way that those responses evolve over time as well. there's there are connections with vector-borne disease. We've talked about this earlier today. I'm just listing a bunch here. We know that higher temperatures increase many species of insects' reproductive rates, and so there's plenty of reason to believe that in many areas the incidence of vector-borne disease will increase with climate change. One of the ways that's looked at is by turning climatological variables into ecological indices, basically trying to estimate the suitability of an area for the disease or for the carrier. In this case, looking at the suitability of regions for the malaria bearing mosquito. And so the highest suitability is in Africa, but there's also suitability across much of the world, actually, and Brazil as well. When we turn the climate dial forward to the end of the century, there is an increase in suitability to the malaria mosquito across a ton of the world, but you see it in Brazil, you see it in North America, you see it across Europe. So we can expect that in the absence of additional policy and action, mosquitoes have the ability to move into these areas. So now I want to talk about adaptation with health in particular, as opposed to some of the other kinds of impacts from climate change. There's plenty of reason to believe there's a big potential for adaptation. The effect of the relationship between heat and mortality in the United States has dropped by 80% as air conditioning has expanded. Right after the French heat wave in 2012, was it? Air conditioning was adopted on a wide scale in France. So there's a real potential for moderating the impacts of climate change through air conditioning. It so happens that that is also going to produce more demand for electricity, which means that there's going to be more climate change. But let's leave that to the side for now. So we want to look at what kind of adaptation do we actually see across the globe. Do people seem to be adapting? I'm going to show that in two ways. One is by taking data on health and temperature and splitting out into different deciles of average temperature. So starting first with the coldest parts of the world and looking at how those areas respond to a hot day. So this is the effect of, labeled here, a 32 degrees C day. How much more do people die relative to a 23 C day? And in those coldest areas, a single day will bump up the mortality rate by a good 6 or so deaths per 100,000. As you get to warmer areas, we actually see that people do adapt, and the average increase in death rate from that hot day is much less, though it seems to even out around 2.5 deaths per 100,000.
How was this design? How was this?
This was drawing from data across the globe on mortality rates and relating it to average historical temperatures. And then the other way that we can look at this is by thinking about temperature, think about how this response curve changes with income. So all of the response curves I've showed you have had this sort of U-shaped look where people die both from high temperatures and from low temperatures. As people get richer, we expect they're going to be more able to adapt, and that response curve should flatten out. And so we want to, and so we looked at that, and we did actually see it in the data. This data that I'm talking about, where we looked at it, was by piecing together a data set of about half the world's population, looking at high-resolution records of death rates across the globe for about 8 different countries or regions. That's splitting out the EU as all its different countries. And then we can look at how both rich and poor countries and hot and cold countries respond to changes in temperature. What we see is that there are minor responses for most age groups, but for older people, there's this very strong U-shaped curve, just like what you would expect, where a single day at 30 degrees C is going to increase the deaths per 100,000 by about 5 deaths per 100,000. And so then we can actually look at how sensitive different parts of the world are to these high temperatures. This is the world as it currently is or was in 2015 in terms of the increase in deaths per 100,000 when you have a day of 32 degrees. And the areas that are most affected by that day are going to be in hot places, like Sub-Saharan Africa, and poor places like Sub-Saharan Africa. Sorry, it's the other wrong. They're going to be either poor places, like Sub-Saharan Africa, or they're going to be cold places, like like Canada and Russia, where people are not adapted to high temperatures. And then we can roll this forward and see that by 2050, because people are getting richer and because they're adapting to higher temperatures, that sensitivity to temperature decreases and decreases in 2075. And by 2099, there are still some pockets, like Somalia, which remains incredibly poor in 2099 in our projections. But people are much less sensitive because of their ability, because they've adapted. When we look at the total effect of this, the change in, so now I'm going to take those sensitivities and I'm going to apply them to future climate data. And I'm going to ask how many more people are going to die by the end of the century. This is a change in deaths per 100,000 because of climate change. Without adaptation, it would go up to a little between 1 and 200 additional deaths per 100,000. I'll relate that to a couple of numbers in a minute. With adaptation, it will go down to about 35. And then there's also going to be some adaptation costs, which are going to bring it back up a bit. What does that actually mean? So this on the left is our predicted number of additional deaths by the end of the century. And on the right is comparing that to current causes of death. So in low-income regions, the additional deaths from climate change are going to be about 100 deaths per 100,000, which is equivalent to sort of all deaths from cancer. In hot regions, it's quite similar. In high-income regions and cold regions, the additional deaths, or rather the lives saved from reduced higher temperatures in winters are sort of offset by the costs that people have to put into adaptation, basically taking money away from things that they could be doing to support their health otherwise. I know that I'm about time, so I'm just going to do a couple of things. When we think about the benefits of mitigation, we do it in terms of mitigation in climate change talk is switching from a high emission scenario to a lower emission scenario. We do it in terms of these RCPs. We heard about RCP 8.5 to 4.5 before. So if you think about the benefits of that kind of policy, we could go from this scenario, which is the numbers I was quoting you, where we're going to have about as many additional deaths as total 40 deaths. It was about the total deaths of infectious diseases, a little bit less than the total deaths of infectious diseases. And we can bring that down to from about 50 deaths per 100,000 to about 10 deaths per 100,000. So I think there are a few open questions I'd like to sort of throw out there as potential opportunities for collaboration between the work that I've been showing you here and the incredible data that you've been putting together at Cidacs. And one is to really dig into this question of who's really vulnerable to these high temperature death rates. To what extent, extending the work that we've done, are income and temperature adaptation going to be really beneficial, but doing that at both in a way that's both more aware of the context and with higher resolution data, and think about how that's going to change over the next 20, 50, 80 years. That's going to just confirm or deny some of the things that we've been able to get at the global level. But then, with this data, it'd be really interesting to look at the particular methods of adaptation. So for example, how do different housing types or the availability of air conditioning and ventilation affect this sensitivity or vulnerability to high temperatures? And people don't spend all their time in their homes. What kinds of professions are most susceptible? What kinds of demographics are most susceptible? What kind of adaptation policies actually work? Is it effective to provide warnings or additional information when we, in the future, as temperatures increase, we're going to have to start thinking about providing new ways for people to get indoors and cool down, or helping people get to hospitals and clinics. And so how can we look at the potential of some of these adaptation policies before we need them? And that is what I have to say. Thank you.
Question?
James, it's very interesting. I just have a question about, so your modelling over the years was looking at increasing reductions in poverty, the ability to adapt, and air conditioning, etc.
Yeah.
But what happens if you have a lot of environmental degradation with global warming and people don't become richer?
Mm-hmm. So there are fairly few scenarios out there that actually have the world being a poor place even with climate change. It won't be, it's definitely, all indications point to the incredible need for mitigating climate change and doing it quite strongly. But there isn't that much evidence that says that climate change is going to be so big, even if we didn't deal with it, that we wouldn't still be able to keep developing as an economy. Yeah. So even it would be a horrible thing for us to not deal with climate change, but the evidence or the scenarios that we tend to deal with all say, even if we didn't, we're going to be richer by the end of the century than we are now.
But it seems very different from, like, say, IPCC reports.
Richer than now, but not like.
Not as rich as we
Talking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
it because there is people. Okay.
Yeah, it's richer than now, but doesn't mean that it's like richer than it could have been.
Right.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't mean access to cheap fuel, which may be an issue.
Access what?
To cheap fuel. Air conditioning requires a lot of energy.
Right.
It requires access to cheap fuel to be able to run it, unless you can do it through.
So I mean, maybe it's not so important to talk about this sort of extreme scenario where we don't have policy around climate change, because we all expect that we're going to be able to do a lot of mitigation, and that's going to take place through replacing our current energy system from a fossil fuel-based system to renewable energy. Fortunately, air conditioning doesn't need fuel; it just needs electricity. So this is the kind of solution we're thinking about. Yeah.
I think one of the adaptation features that can be included in this scenario is greenness, increasing greenness in the cities. At the same time, takes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and also makes a cooling system for cities.
Yeah.
And the way cities are designed, and all the variables that we've been discussing here today in terms of land use and the city design itself.
See, but
they can all be featured in as adaptation features.
But now, so I would say comparing city with different level of greenness, because there is no policy to increase the greenness in a city.
No policy.
It's practically impossible.
But can be a policy.
No,
No,
for
it's
example, for example, the urban heat island effect can get up to about 4 degrees C, which can result in increases in death rates on the order of several deaths per 100,000. If you even paint roofs white, or if you start replacing some roads as we move away from cars with green spaces, it would have a huge effect. And that's just the heat side, not even the other benefits of green spaces. So this is definitely something to
here in Cidacs we have ideas to explore, because I'm going to show you tomorrow. But a lot of things that we're doing is related to the evaluation of social policy, the impact of social policy on health. In particular, two. One is the cash transfer, Brazilian cash transfer program, and three. Another is the cisterns wells program, and the people are also evaluating a housing program for poor people. Then I think it's a great opportunity to see how this mitigate effects of the I don't say climate change, but at least how the temperature will modulate or decrease the impact of temperature changes, on health. I think we have a nice opportunity to do that. If you know how to measure well the question of temperature. One of the objectives of the seminar, in some way, to give us insight how to include climate variables in this system, because you're doing a lot of work on social policies, They have really interest in that, and now you want to put the temperature and see if it is mitigate the effect of temperature in areas like in Northeast Brazil, or hot areas, humid areas, or dry areas in the Northeast.
I mean, I mentioned their wet bulb temperature because that's sort of well shown to be physically directly related to health. But we've used precipitation, total number of wet days, maximum temperature, minimum temperature, average temperature. Actually, in different regions, it looks like the right weather variable to use to try to understand the connection between climate and health is different. So we find that we have to reevaluate our assumptions every time we look at a different region.
Another suggestion is to study migration. For instance, someone from the south of Brazil moving to Rio will suffer a lot because there is a medical expression for that. You regulate your internal temperature. How do you say that? The mecanismo de
thermoregulation.
So your body has a certain thing that it's expecting to regulate it at one level.
People say that this regulation is built young, when you're young, and if you move somewhere when you're adult or elder, you will suffer a lot.
In some sense, though, we're all going to be moving to a hotter country for climate change. And what we see is that it takes time for people to adapt to increases in temperature. It looks like about 15 years to really adapt to the new temperature. So the faster the temperatures are increasing, the more you're not going to be able to keep up.
Can you make a comment on this wet bulb? Wet bulb temperature will never be higher than the current temperature.
Please talk it loudly because people need to hear.
Oh, sorry.
There is other people outside the room, and then
The wet bulb temperature will never be higher than the actual temperature. The wet bulb is when there is evaporation, so it's always lower than the temperature that you measure actually. The problem is, it's okay because it includes moisture. If it's high temperature and it's very moist, wet bulb will be high. But there is, but it's not exactly how you feel. Sometimes it can't evaporate because the air is already humid. It's very humid and you can't evaporate even if you have. We feel that in Rio de Janeiro, which is very moist, we are near the sea, the air is already has high temperature. And then when you have 30 or 32 degrees, you are feeling like 40.
yeah.
You really suffer.
Salvador is very yes, yeah.
Probably like that,
Ah,
because you have
yeah.
very similar conditions in
Yeah,
Rio.
in Cambria, yeah.
You feel really bad, although they say it's 30, but you feel like
Yeah,
worse than
34
other
or
days.
35.
Right,
yeah.
right. You shouldn't look at you shouldn't relate that, 30 degrees wet bulb temperature to what you feel like in a 33 temperature day. It would be unbearably hot. And
Yeah. So I think sometimes there are some index like thermal heat, but they all constructed in a very empirical way. But it's still, I don't think there is still a good temperature of this feeling. That you feel there are some 30 degrees in some days that you feel very uncomfortable, and there are 30 degrees in other days that you feel like 30 degrees.
Is there feels like index?
so there is, unfortunately, as you said, they're quite arbitrary. So we decided to focus on wet bulb temperature because it's there is a physical relationship that you can get out. It's nothing arbitrary about it, even though it's not actually exactly what your body
It
would
is
experience.
lower than the temperature. It can be like, if it's 30 degrees in the air, it can be like 28 or 26. It depends on how bad, how moist it is.
But it's not internalized for a person, so it's difficult to. And I assume it would also be different for different types of people in the population. So it's not this homogeneous sort of feeling that you might feel something, I might feel
Right,
something.
people have different metabolisms.
Exactly.
But I did see one of the papers I looked at said that by the end of the century, there are going to be places in Brazil, with over 35 degree wet bulb temperatures, which means that you cannot go outdoors or you will die, unless you have an air conditioning house or something.
It might be invented by then.
Okay, we will have a short break for a drop. And thank you.
Esse carnaval aí.
Aí a harmonia do samba já tá ensaiando já pro carnaval. E na Bahia faz reunião científica com pagode tocando de plano de fundo.
Tem um antigo hétero mais, tá certo? Aí Rio com hétero mais,
Aí é tradicional de show.
Onde teve um show, no começo de janeiro eu tava aqui, teve um show grande aí, acho.
Você veio para aquela conferência do clima?
Não, eu tava de férias aqui no começo do ano.
Tem.
Certamente, é o estado da harmonia de segunda-feira.
Eu lembro que a gente tava tendo uma coisa que tava todo mundo falando. Mas é longe a beça aqui, não?
Mas essa história. Aumentar o tamanho de energia.
Okay, our last presentation of this session, Erick, Giovani, Sperandio. Artificial intelligence and numerical modeling applied to forecast and simulation of air pollution. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as presented, my name is Erick. Nice to meet you. I'm from Nascimento. It's very near here to Cidacs. It's a university center. And I'm going to present some case studies regarding simulation and forecasting of air pollution using artificial intelligence and numerical modeling. Just to put some things into discussion, because I think that's a good opportunity for us to talk about it. Well, as you know, computational modeling is a very important tool to leverage the work of science and allowing researchers to conduct computationally simulated experiments in order to better understand the process that are involved in different areas of knowledge. In this case of atmospheric sciences, we have a lot of processes like microphysics, radiation, power formation, diffraction, diffusion, transport, chemical reactions, air pollution, and so on, that we need to simulate in order to predict and to understand how things are going on the atmosphere, right? So, in this matter, I'll present two air pollution cases for us and bring this to discussion. Also, in the final part of the presentation, I'll bring some simulations using global air pollution modeling because we have some interesting discussions here about the Sahara contribution to Brazil and so on. I'd like to put some highlights to shed some light to the discussion also. I think it will be very interesting. So the first, those works were previously published, so you can access them after this presentation if you want to. The first one is the hourly tropospheric ozone concentration forecasting using deep learning. I don't know if you have already been familiar with deep learning and artificial intelligence. Many things have been accomplished using such kind of technology. And we have done some work in this field, coupling artificial intelligence to tackle problems in atmospheric science, right? So, as you know, ozone is a secondary pollutant that is not formed by anthropogenic emissions. We do not emit ozone into the atmosphere. Of course, we have the good ozone and the bad ozone. The good ozone is up there in the upper part of the atmosphere, the one that protects us from the UV light from sun. But the bad ozone is the same ozone that occurs that we have contact with it. When we are exposed to ozone concentrations, it is a harmful pollutant for us. It has some bad influence for our health. So it is important for us to understand and to predict with a good accuracy the concentration of tropospheric ozone. So ozone is, as I said, what is the pointer? Ozone is not emitted by anthropogenic sources, but is formed because of the combination of sunlight, of NOx, of VOCs, and humidity, and so on. And based on some certain conditions, it is formed during the day and consumed during the night. And based on emissions from anthropogenic sources, it can be formed. According to certain levels of ozone concentrations in the atmosphere, in the lower troposphere, it can harm our health. Some concentrations are very hazardous for us. We can compare the ozone concentrations, the high levels of ozone concentrations, as in the lungs, as the same effect of sunburn, right? So it's very important for us to understand and to forecast, to simulate with good accuracy. So that's the main contribution to this work, because when we use some type of numerical modeling that's the state of the art when we talk about tropospheric ozone simulation and forecasting. They are too computationally expensive to simulate. And we need a lot of data, emissions data, inventory, and so on. And weather data from numerical weather forecasting models like WRF or other kind of atmospheric modeling. And we need to put them into work and use some kind of models like SMAC, WRF-CAM, or Chimera, like in Europe, to simulate, to predict the ozone concentrations. But when we use artificial intelligence based on data, we can, after developing, train, validate, and test, and fit a good neural network or artificial intelligence model, the time for the inference to forecast, to simulate, to generate concentrations up to the time is very low expensive in terms of computational cost. So it's important for us to try to understand and to develop some new different approaches to this kind of problem. So that's our main goal in this work. So we have used data from public available data set in the state of Espírito Santo. Espírito Santo state is in the south of Bahia, between Rio de Janeiro and Bahia state, right? So you can see here, Bahia state is right there. We are right here, right now, Salvador. Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, and Espírito Santo. It's not a so famous state in Brazil, but they are here. I'm from there, of course, by the way. The main part is because we have a good data set there of monitoring stations with meteorological and quality data. So we have used this data set to train our model, okay? So we have used hourly average of those kind of parameters, particulate matter below 10 micrograms, total suspended particulate matter, and so on, the air quality parameters, and also the meteorological parameters to fit the model. Well, I must explain to you why such amount of data. Many works just use the same time series for doing time series forecasting. For example, I could just use the ozone concentration here to develop my model. The problem is that I want the artificial intelligence model to learn the inner aspects, the physical relationship between each of those parameters, right? So the main hypothesis here is that can I train this model and make it understand and learn from the data what is the relationship between each kind of data, and after using this to predict 24 hours ahead, hourly forecasting, the ozone concentration in this region, okay? So, almost more than 30,000 samples. We have separated for training and validation 75% from years 2001 to 2005, and separate the rest, 25% of the data, from the years of 2006 to 2015, okay? It's interesting because, as you know, we are in a climate change situation. So the trends and the way the meteorological parameters and air quality are also increasing during the time. Is this kind of model trained and use just data from those years able to predict what's going to happen in those years in this scale, in this time scale? Well, let's see. Well, this is a configuration of the artificial intelligence model. It's a dense, deep neural network using a multi-layer perception approach. I don't know if you are familiar with it. Just a very technical aspect, but I can explain if you want to. I haven't put layer.
The problem no one will understand.
That's a problem. Okay, but I think we can have some time to discuss it. Well, I'm going to show you it. So It's a published work, so if you
No,
want to
I'll
go
have
to
to
the
just
deep
look
parts
at
of
that.
the work, you can go there and see. Okay? The basic part is we have a dense neural network. 6 hidden layers, one input, one output layer. Okay? The output layer is formed by 24 layers because we want 24 hours. The first to the 24-hour forecast for the ozone concentrations. This graph shows us during the training epochs of the neural network model, how we perform in terms of the overfitting or underfitting. We have the loss of the training procedure and the loss of the validation procedure. We can see that at the final part, after more than around 120 epochs, it arises to the same level, showing that we have a model that's not overfitting nor underfitting. Okay? Well, what does it mean? It means that the model is generalizing well. Okay? Came to the same solution in terms of error. And this graph shows us the predictions using for June. It's a winter time there in Vitória, like in the South Hemisphere. The orange line is the predict for 1 hour ahead, and the blue line is the observed for those different periods. Okay, but this is for 1 hour, and this is for the 24-hour. Okay, as you can see, particularly the model is able to capture the trends and to, with a good accuracy, to predict, to forecast the ozone concentrations up to 24 hours ahead. All right? Same graph for December 2014 and January 2015, many years after, okay, 9 years after. This part of the data set was not presented to the neural network during the training phase. So it's an unseen data, okay, to test the model. So you can see also the model is able to capture the trends and to also forecast with a good accuracy the behavior of ozone concentrations in that region. Well, it shows us that we can use deep learning for this matter. Of course we need data. That's a problem. As some of you have already anticipated, here in Brazil and some other regions, we have problems in having good data sets for this kind of usage. I have used this data set in Vitória because it's a good one. And even even that data set is not so good at all, but it's a good one, I can see that. But for here, for example, Salvador, we need to have access to some kind of data sets regarding meteorological inequality data for this kind of application. But we are working on that. Just to show us that it's possible, and we have accomplished good results. I have more research on that, but just to show what have already been published in this matter. The other work is using a numerical modeling framework called WRF's Osmoximec. I don't know if you know or are familiar with this kind of framework. The WRF model is the state-of-the-art model in terms of weather forecasting. There are, of course, other models. And, for example, we have a Brazilian numerical modeling that's called the BREMS, that is also a very good one. But the WRF model is widely used in the world. So I think you have already mostly heard about it, I think. The SMOKE and CIMAC, SMOKE is a preprocessor for anthropogenic emissions to input into the CIMAC. CIMAC model is a numerical model for photochemical and air quality forecasting simulation. It's a North American model developed by UNC, University of North Carolina, and I think they are the most widely used model in this matter in the world, in terms of publication, in terms of works and so on. and they are continuously being working on it. So we are in a research project that we are developing some research using this kind of numerical modeling framework to apply to here to Salvador metropolitan region. Okay. Most difficult part is because we lack information about emissions inventory. We need emissions inventory, high quality emissions inventory to input in such kind of numerical modeling framework. And in this work, we will use, this is the metropolitan region. This is by state. We have done 3-domain modeling, okay? With the first domain with 9 kilometers, the second with 3 kilometers, and the last one, the final, with 1 kilometer resolution, high resolution for metropolitan modeling, okay? And we have some information about some anthropogenic emissions from a complex of petrochemical plants here, and other here also. Some huge factories over there. And here is Salvador City. We are right there, I think, over there.
Nearest.
Yeah, I think we are right there, right now. And of course, we for this work, it's already published as well. We have used information from this source for a local inventory, and also inventory from the EDGAR emissions dataset. EDGAR stands from, let me see if I recall, emissions dataset for global atmospheric research. Yeah. So the EDGAR dataset is public available, but the resolution is not so fine. It's for 0.1 degree.
10 kilometers.
Yeah, around 10, 11 kilometers. Okay. The framework is comprised by those parts. The terrestrial data set and send out data from global models like GFS and Denyse FNL are input to WRF model, the methodological model, which drives the photochemical quality model called CMAQ. CMAQ is based on the boundary conditions preprocessor, the initial conditions preprocessor, and the meteorological conditions input processor. And the chemical transport model is up there. And smoke is the emissions inventory preprocessor. Okay? It generates an hourly 3-degree chemical concentrations set of files that we read to have access to what was simulated by the model. We have separated those 2 periods for the modeling, a dry and a rainy season. Here in Salvador we have a very well set of periods. We have a dry season that goes from November to March, something like that. And rainy season starts from April to September, okay? And these plots show us the concentration, the emissions of different air pollutants from the EDGAR dataset, okay? But as we already have analyzed, the EDGAR is not so good for South America. I think we have some good information from the Northern Hemisphere, but not for South America. So we have also to struggle with it. But it's what we have right now. So we are working on it. We also have used the emissions from biogenic sources using the mega model, but their contributions are very, very low. And as I said, we have those information from those for this industry and anthropogenic emissions. As you can see, we don't have here information from the vehicle emissions. We are right now finishing our work with my one of my master students. That she's developing a vehicle emissions inventory for the metropolitan region of Salvador. We are planning to use this in this work as well. And for the boundary conditions in this work, we used previously simulated scenario, used the same boundary framework, but to input it as boundary conditions to our domain of interest. Okay. Those graphs show us the comparison between what was observed and what was modeled by this modeling framework using WRFs, MOOCs, and CIMAC. As you can see, for the dry and rainy seasons, for the sulfur dioxide, we have the model not capturing very so good the behavior of the observed and during the rainy and the dry seasons. So we must work on it to increase the ability of the model to simulate what is observed, developing more information in the emissions inventory. That's what our main mission right now. We have used so far this with success in São Paulo State, Rio de Janeiro, and Espírito Santo as well. And right now we are trying to do the same way and to develop this for the metropolitan region of Salvador. This is the simulated scenario. As you can see, we can simulate the entire scenario, a 3D scenario, over the time, using this kind of approach, which is different when we use artificial intelligence because we are looking just to one point. But with some kind of numerical modeling approach, we simulate at the same time all the grid of our interest for dry and rainy seasons. The same is for carbon monoxide, CO. As you can see, there are moments that we have more concentrations in Salvador City, but the main industrial areas are farther than the city. It means that the photochemical transport model is showing us that it arises into the atmosphere and is deposited and goes to this region over the time. It is for the gas and also for NO2. NO2 is a precursor of ozone. And this simulation right now, I'll show you a simulation of, it's an ongoing work, of GenScan model. The GenScan model was developed by Harvard and other partners, institutes, for global photochemical and pollution modeling. It's interesting because the resolution right here, I think is around 4 degrees. It's quite a coarser resolution. It's for global modeling. But what is interesting, it is at surface, okay? We can see that the transport of, the formation and transport, in this case of ozone, in the surface level is not so huge in the surface. But when we look into higher levels, we can see we have higher concentrations and is transported from some regions to the other, for example, from China to USA and forth, and from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere. Okay? And in our experiments, we have published works when we used the Gervasio model to downscale the air pollutant concentrations to the regional modeling, and used it as boundary conditions to the numerical modeling. And we have increased the results of the modeling used such kind of approach. Reference of our works and also about the impacts of ozone in human health. And I thank you for your time.
Since you're doing time prediction, did you consider a recurrent neural network or an LSTM? And then separately, in that first application, I think some of the variables you were feeding in were actually results of the ozone, like changes in NOx could be driven by changes in ozone. When you were predicting things out 24 hours, how did you make sure that you weren't feeding any information that they could use to infer those changes?
Okay, the first question. In that work, we didn't use LSTM or any kind of recurrent neural network. But right now we are developing new research using not only LSTM but also GRU and also CNN one-dimensional, 1D. Okay, it's right now under development. And the second question, well, we input those data at once. So here, we input this data. Think about operational model that is forecasting ozone up to 24 hours hourly. Okay, so I have right now those parameters that were measured right now in the monitoring station. So I input it into the model, and it outputs 24 values, one for each hour, for the ozone concentration for each hour, up to 24 hours ahead.
Okay. See, but one logic, because only to understand, Erick, you use so many parameters that do not exist, these parameters, né? They don't exist in general, né? You got the parameter in a specific measurement. Yeah. Then you project that, you estimate, the model was very good to the same area where you was using this. But this is useful for you to generalize, you try to generalize that for others' contexts, yeah? To use the model to see if it adjusts to real data or to real facts in others' contexts.
Okay. Right now it's an ongoing work, but I can say to you that it's possible, yes. But it's an ongoing work that we are performing right now to answer your question and to put some good results and to show what is possible and what is not possible. For example, well, I have a bunch of good data here, but if I didn't use, for example, particulate matter, I have used it, but I know that particulate matter is not a precursor for ozone, so I could drop it, for example. But sulfur dioxide, nitrogen, and dioxide and monoxide, I could also drop it, for example. And carbon monoxide are precursors for ozone. And those meteorological parameters. So there is some research that we can do for understand what are the main parameters that we must use to perform such kind of AI model to have good results. It's a good question. And just it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great work. Thanks. Do you have some information on PM 2.5? I've seen that you're using PM 10, and you have some ozone information, and there are a lot of work that they are using PM 2.5, but it's kind of difficult to find data for that. So
Yeah.
do you know the status of this kind of information for Brazil or Salvador at the moment?
At the moment, we have some places that have such kind of measurements. Right there we have, but we didn't use because we have the total particulate matter. And in Salvador, I have access to 3 years of good data set, using all of those data. But only 3 years are not so good for use for this kind of project, the kind of attempt. We have a company right there, and we should be able to consult the government, local environmental agencies to look for more data. It will be very interesting. I think we can discuss this, and maybe one output of this workshop should be go there and ask for more data, maybe.
But it exists.
Yeah, it exists. Yes. It's sparse, but it exists.
Erick, I mean, this model, that this one specifically, is for forecasting ozone levels. But I mean, how far? I mean, what's the length, the period of the forecasting? You can forecast for like a month, or just for the next day, or for a year.
Okay.
What's the?
Of course, if you want to forecast, to perform hourly forecasting up to 1 month ahead or year, it should be more difficult than to only 24 hours. But if you want to predict as in a climate change approach, to predict the next 6 months or the next years, yearly or monthly, should be easier to accomplish. Yes, so it's possible.
Did you conduct experiments in this way? Because you only showed
short-term, yeah, just short-term predictions. Actually, here we are interested in prediction of short-term predictions, because we want to understand if we are able, with good accuracy, to develop and to deliver to the society mechanisms to increase the ability of governmental agencies or any kind of institute to say to the population, yeah, oh look, you have a problem the next 24 hours regarding ozone, you must use masks and so on. It is not the reality of Salvador, I know. But there are some places in Camaçari City, Camaçari here, where there are petrochemical complex, where it should be useful. And also, with the increasing of urban areas, and it's a point that I would like to talk about in a possible moment. And when we have more population living in urban areas, we have more urbanization, so we have more heat island, we have more air pollution and so on. So we can see that in China, for example. In China, they have huge problems regarding air pollution, and they use masks also because of it. So it is interesting I think, to have some kind of operational model to say this to the population, to the governmental agencies. But of course, we can do some modeling for short and medium term and long term predictions as well.
No, I saw that you on your second model you showed you using the Edgar data set, which I used 2 years ago. I tried to use it more, but I found it very difficult. I mean, because we were trying to predict PM 2.5 or PM 10, I can't remember now, based on their emission, because this is an emission inventory. But you mentioned, I mean, for South America, the quality is not very good. But you showed that you use also another one, which is called Megan, I think.
Yeah, Megan.
Is it the same? Is this like?
Megan is for
Megan is for concentrations.
Biogenic emissions, yeah.
All right.
Because
biogenic
emissions are mainly composed by VOCs, okay, volatile organic compounds, and they play a very important role in the ozone formation.
But if you want to predict or to forecast PM 2.5 or PM 10, would the Edgar be enough, or you still need the Megan?
but it depends on your requirements. Well, CIMAC model is a whole complete model for forecasting all the chemical parameters that you like. So gases and particulates, it's able to simulate at the same time at also. So if you have Edgar emissions, you can, of course, you can simulate and forecast particulate matter concentrations in the future. Also simulate into a region if you want to, if you like some data, if you want to have data in a region that you do not have a aquatic station, monitoring station, you can use such kind of approach to generate new data.
In my case, we were not planning to forecast, but just to get information from places where you don't have monitoring stations. But we found it very difficult to work with the Edgar data set.
Well, we can.
It's good for having the proportion of different sectors like industry, transport, all the sectors of the economy. So you can have the proportions are interesting, but the values, I mean the concentrations to get from emissions to concentrations
to different sectors. Yeah. Well, one approach you can try to understand to learn is using the smoke model. Smoke is part of this framework, and it's not so easy to work on, but you can use this smoke model, and it tries to leverage the work of dealing with the Edgar data set. So it's a workaround for it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. The idea now is to promote a discussion about 10 or 15 minutes. We'll take some notes, prepare a report, prepare a brainstorm. We need to discuss some hot topics, some big issues. Okay? Okay. Do you have energy?
I think we've heard so many very interesting but very different talks. It's very difficult.
Some of them complementary, but
yeah, I think important that you need first data. It is important. It is. The idea is
circumstances. We need data.
No, but it's not data, because you have already a lot of healthy data in Cidacs, social data.